fire is by far the most popular damage type in Elden Ring and accessible to every single build in very unique ways. So, which one's the best? Now here's the thing, we already have a poll done about this and it's clear that most people believe it's Faith, and while I agree with that, that doesn't give you the full picture. So let's go ahead and look at the 5 main routes you go and how well they compare to each other. Overall, we're going to be looking at a meta between level 125 to level 175. However, just know that all these options are incredible and none of these options are really bad outside of magma sorceries. And this is going to be number 5, the worst Pyromancer setup on the list, which is going to be a pure int build or a int faith build. And the reason for this is you're relying on magma sorceries, which can do an incredible amount of damage if you set the fight well, or you have to go for a completely separate stat spread to focus on incantations. Here's the issue though, the incantations can be applied better on a pure faith build or on a faith arcane build. And unlike strength, which has a kind of similar predicament in terms of the scaling, outside the fact that strength scales a little worse in terms of incantations, strength still has fire weapons. Meanwhile, with intelligence and intelligence faith builds, they only have 2, and they're really not good for anything but their skills. And this effectively gives you 3 setups, one of which is pretty mid for PvE but can nuke down bosses if you know what you're doing. Another setup in which is amazing for PvE, however, it is super limited in what you could actually do with it, since skill spamming can only get you so far. And finally, the incantation route, which is going to be the strongest route, and that's kind of the issue here because it kind of gets outperformed by the arcane faith and the pure faith variety. And with the lack of weapon variety, this is going to cause it to kind of struggle in PvP, because there's not really too much mix-up potential or weapon potential, especially if nothing with hyper armor, anything to really catch the opponent off guard or give significant pressure. Essentially, the int-faith hybrid routes just don't give you too many options, and it kind of restricts itself in terms of weapon variety. And you might think that this is going to be the same issue with the next one, but it's a little different than that, and I'll explain why. And that is when we go to number 4 on the list, which is going to be the Alchemist setup. This is going to be your Dex route. Now this right here is mostly pure Dex with a little bit of Faith, and you can go even more to Faith to get some madness into your build, but stick with the perfumes. Now the perfume route is incredibly interesting because these are pure fire weapons on a build that normally doesn't do any fire damage at all. And in general, they're actually kind of underrated. They're not amazing, but they're much better than what they're made out to be for a couple reasons. One, these are amazing giant slayer weapons that could just nuke down bosses quite easily. Additionally, they can kind of dish out a decent amount of damage. They do have a few problems with them. One, they aren't great for staggering mid-sized enemies, and they do struggle in PvP in terms of pressuring, because for the most part, they don't do that much poise damage. About 80 if you land both hits, unless you were to do the jump heavy attack, and that is a main weakness of this weapon, is that specific thing where PvP, they don't do much poise damage. And same thing in PvE, so if you have like a Knight or an Omen, the only way to stagger them reliably is rolling sparks. And in PvP, it is either going to be poise counting or jump attacks. So overall, it's good, it does a lot of damage, and it has a lot of uses to it, but it's a kind of tool more than anything else. It doesn't work for every situation. However, even when those situations do not work, you still have other tools like Flaming Strike and other fire-based Ashes of War that you don't lose out too much damage on, specifically with Flaming Strike and Black Flame Tornado. And if we're talking about early game, you could actually get Black Flame Tornado pretty early on, due to being the base Ash of War for the God-Skinned Peeler. However, excluding that, Dex builds do fall short of other Pyromancy setups. And that's due to a lack of variety of weapon options and the fact it does kind of lack incantations in general. Now you may wonder, why did I rank this higher than the intelligence setup? And it's because the intelligence setup has to be a dedicated build with a lot of sacrifice in order for it to work. While the dexterity setup, you pretty much get about the same amount of effectiveness, if not a little bit more. However, you don't have to compromise any other part of a standard dex build. Now, both these two setups aren't that great because, like I said, they don't really have too many other weapon options. Let's compare this to Arcane, which is going to be number 3 on our list. So, here's what's good about Arcane. 1, it has amazing arcane scaling, especially with just a little bit of faith, and only being slightly outdone by the Golden Order seal in terms of scaling, but by less than 1%. However, it has the Dragon Communion incantations, including Magma Breath and the Fire Dragon Breath. And that is a huge game changer because those could do a huge amount of damage. And if it was just that one difference, it would still do better than an int build. However, there's one other thing to add. Dedicated fire-based weapons. This is especially true with Mohg's Sacred Spear and the Rivers of Blood, which are both easily accessible on a Faith Arcane build with only a change of a couple talismans, meaning that you really don't have to sacrifice the effectiveness of your incantations in order for it to be effective. In addition, the soft caps to this build are incredibly low, about like 55 per each level, so effectively just go straight in for Arcane, and when you hit 55 you could go somewhere else. And that ability to pretty much almost always be 100% with just a decent amount of investment to Arcane and Faith is really what makes this really strong. Let's compare this to the End option. Now the End option has about the same scaling in terms of in comparison with the Sacred Seal, however you have almost no other options outside of your Magma sorceries, which aren't that great, as well as your Faith Int weapons, which are more just Faith weapons with int requirements, and you would have to invest more into Faith to get more out of that. It's just not worth it. It's better to go Arcane for the variety. And on top of that, you got the Dragon Breaths too, which are just generally one of the best incantations in the game, especially with things like the Magma Breath. Now, while I love the Arcane variant, I will say that it's not as good as the next one, which is going to be a Strength build. I'm sorry, but the Strength Pyromancer is still one of the best builds in the game, mostly thanks to Flame of Strike, and Flame of the Redmanes is still pretty good. It's not as good as, let's say, the Perfumes at this point, but it's still pretty good, especially against some bosses. But beyond all that, you have fire-based weapons and infusible weapons, and the ability to infuse weapons with fire damage is kind of a big deal, because that's pretty much gives you every option in the game. And while normally this is not ideal, there are so many ways to buff fire damage in the game, and there are so many enemies that are weak to fire damage, that sometimes, yeah, fire might actually outcompete heavy. This is especially true with the existence of the Fire Grease tier, as well as a lot of bosses like Romina and Melania, who are just straight up weak to fire damage. And there could be an argument about what about incantations, because incantations are absolutely amazing for fire damage. The thing is, you still got a Sacred Seal, you can use those incantations, and it's almost as effective as a pure caster build, which is kind of a big deal. And the fact is, like, investing only like 5 to like maybe 15 points into Faith can be incredibly beneficial in order getting stuff like Golden Bow or Flame Grammy Strength, all of which are staples for killing bosses incredibly quickly. In fact, Strength builds are pretty ideal, like Pyromancers in general. They have every tool at their disposal, and even one of the best fire tools in the game through Flame and Strike. So yes, this is why I'm ranking number 2. However, we gotta talk about number 1, because this is where things get ridiculous, and that is going to be the pure Faith build. While Strength has the ability to cast incantations, and yes, it has some of the best Fire Ashes of War in the game, in fact the best one in my opinion, with Flame and Strike, trust me, Faith kind of takes us all to a new level with 1 Somber Weapons, which of course has the Blastus Blade, which is just a PvE nuke. That also erases your mistakes by giving you a massive heal for every enemy you strike with it. On top of that, you get some really good Ashes of War, such as Black Flame Tornado and Flame Skewer, which are kind of incredibly powerful options. But in addition to all that, you also have the Flame Art, which means, just like Strength, you could use pretty much any weapon in the game and give it the Flame Infusion, and it would be incredibly good. Especially the Bandit's Curved Swords and the Fire Knight Greatsword. And the huge benefit of this right here is because it's an Elemental Ash of War, and because it is Flame specifically, it would have the second highest one-handed AR, only behind Lightning, for most infusible weapons. Which means when you're using weapon skills, it will outcompete the Strength variant 9 times out of 10. But what really makes this one shine is the incantation and tool variety. So some of these incantations are incredibly broken. From Burn O' Flame to Giant's Flame Take Thee, or Fire Serpent, Fire Coil, or Mesmerizorb, you can do an insane amount of damage. But what makes it so good is it gives you every single option in the game that nothing else can really compete with, at least when it comes to Pyromancy. Heck, even with the Faith Arcane and Faith Int builds, they do have an argument of having a higher scaling incantation and Sacred Seal. However, there's a caveat. Every single Pyromancy incantation in the game is tied directly to a Sacred Seal. So when you power stance these Sacred Seals, it is going to scale better than it will on any other seal alone. In fact, you could also just get something like the Jellyfish Shield or a weapon buffed with Sacred Order in the offhand, and that is going to actually outscale the use of using an alternative Sacred Seal in the game, even if it scales higher, just because of that percent multiplier. This includes the Dragon Communion Seal, this includes the Erdtree Seal, and this includes the Golden Order Seal. So in other words, to maximize your damage for most things that are fire damage, Faith is going to be your best option, and there's really no exception to that, especially with being the master of buffs, making it no surprise why it's oftentimes considered the best Pyromancer in the game. Hey, thank you everyone for getting this far in the video. I do appreciate it. You guys are absolutely amazing. Anyways, in the near future, I'm going to try to get both the Storm video out as well as the Lightning video out, so at least I can get those all finished up, and I'm going to try to improve my upload schedule so I get about 2 to 3 videos done a week. Because, yeah, I kind of need to improve my upload schedule because it's been pretty bad. I mean, hell, my last upload was 4 months ago, so yeah, I kind of need to get better on that in order to allow this channel to live, but also not to fail those in which subscribe to me. And for those who did, I do apologize, and I will do better next time. Thank you guys, and have an awesome day. If you haven't done so yet, please consider liking and subscribing, but if you don't, well, I really can't blame you.